So, Lord of the Rings, The War of the Rohirrim, was directed by Kenji Kawayama, and it's about Hera, who is the daughter of Helm Hammerhead. This takes place 183 years before the events of the Lord of the Rings franchise. It's about Helm Hammerhead and his family as they try to prevent an attack from happening that will eventually set off the course of the events of the Lord of the Rings series. At least they think. So this is a movie that, admittedly, I was actually kind of looking forward to because, admittedly, even though I do have the Lord of the Rings movies on Blu-ray, and yes, I do have the Hobbit movies on Blu-ray, I have not seen them on the big screen, and also I am not necessarily the biggest fan of them. I do respect them, but it takes a commitment for me to just sit down and watch them. Did we watch them all for this movie review and such? And I was kind of intrigued because it was going to be animation. It was going to be animated, particularly anime, and I was definitely curious to see like what this franchise is going to do in this new direction and such. And I saw it midly a week or so ago. I've been busy with such things and such, Christmas and such, and I'm going to be honest. This movie was kind of dull. I honestly wanted to like this movie a lot more than I did. Like, I feel like this movie is the exact opposite of what The Lord of the Rings is known for. Like, I feel like those movies are very long, but they still feel very fast enough, and they do have interesting characters. But I feel like this movie doesn't really have that. So let's start off with the pros. The main pro I will say is the animation is jaw-droppingly gorgeous. This is some of the best animation I've seen in a while. Well, maybe not the best, but I was impressed at times. At times I don't think I was even looking at like something that was animated. I thought, that looks real, but it's like I kept forgetting, oh, that is animation. That's really impressive. I'm actually very intrigued by like how they're doing things with this anime style and such. I do think the character designs are also very interesting as well, like Helm Hammerhead. Some of the villains themselves look very interesting themselves. I do think it is very fascinating to kind of see like what this world would be like if it is animated and such. And also, I will say the first act and the third act are probably where the movie kind of shines. For the first act, I'm like, okay, I'm definitely getting invested in this movie a little bit. I'm definitely invested in these characters somewhat. And, the conflict is semi-interesting. But the third act is kind of like when it kind of just throws all that away and it's like, okay, this is mostly just a battle. It's like, yeah, that's pretty much what the Lord of the Rings is like. First and third acts are more impressive than the second act, if I'll be honest. But let's get into the second act. Let's get into the cons I don't like already. The things I don't like about this movie already include a lot of the second act is just kind of dull in my opinion. I don't know. It just kind of felt bored watching. I wasn't invested in the storyline. I wasn't invested in the characters as much. It kind of felt like we saw these things done before in other movies, also in the Lord of the Rings movies. Also, I will say the characters are very thin for the most part. They kind of have like one gear, and that's this trait and such. Like the villain's very generic. The lead character, she's very generic. Helm Hammerhead he's kind of interesting at times, but not really interesting enough as a character. And also, I don't know if this is just me, but like there were a couple times in this movie where I thought it was mostly they kind of just paused the movie to kind of have some sort of inside joke to the franchise. I'm like, did you really just stop this movie right now for that? Like at one point, the main character, she's hiding out from orcs and such. And the orcs they kind of notice her right away. One of them smells her, I guess. And he's like, I smell fresh meat. And I'm thinking, is meat back on the menu, boys? Also, there's another moment towards the end of the movie where I won't spoil it per se, but one of the main characters says the word "my" various times, like this is mine, and this is mine, and this is mine, and this person has all this and such. And I'm thinking, he's like, okay, well, do they also have your axe? I feel like this movie, it's weird because I feel like they were trying to make jokes that Lord of the Rings fans will know, but I think it's more like people like me who are not really the biggest fans of Lord of the Rings. I'll get those references because I've seen the movies before, but I feel like it's going to annoy a lot of people who, really love this franchise and such, and I just think it's kind of boring. Like, I don't know if it's because of the way I took it, or it's just the way they thought it was, or it's just the characters themselves. It was just kind of weird to me that they went in that direction. I'm like, why? Why would you do that? And even though I do think it is it is kind of fascinating to see like what this world will look like in this animation style and such. I never really felt like it was Middle Earth. Like if you told me that this was just some random anime movie that came out, became really popular and such, and it didn't have any ties to Lord of the Rings whatsoever, I would be like, okay, I'm kind of invested in such. But I also would have a lot of the same issues. I feel like the main characters are just not that interesting and such. And also, the first and the third act are really the only times when the movie kind of shines. And even when it does shine, it doesn't really shine that brightly. This movie, I wouldn't say it's an insult to the Lord of the Rings. Again, I'm not the biggest fan of this franchise, but I do respect the franchise. I don't go back and watch this franchise as much as a lot of film nerds probably do, but I do think the animation is very interesting. I do think it's very well done. The character design is very interesting. The sound design is also very well done. It does sound very interesting and very intense at times. I do think that's really well done. And again, the first and third act are where the movie shines. The second act is where the movie just slows down, and I'm just like, I just want this movie to wrap up. I feel like the pacing is just off in this movie, mainly because that second act is off. And it kind of makes this movie feel longer than it actually is, which is weird because this is the shortest of all the Lord of the Rings movies that have come out in the last few years, which is just weird to me. So even though the animation is great, some of the character designs are interesting, and I do think the first and third act are the only times I was actually really invested, it's the second act that drags the movie longer than it feels like it needs to. The characters are very thin. The inside jokes, at least to me, just fell flat. It doesn't really have much character development, and it never really felt like a Lord of the Rings movie. It felt like a generic anime movie that didn't really leave that much of an impact. I will say that I feel like ever since that trilogy, I feel like even the Hobbit movies, which yes, I do own on Blu-ray, I feel like they just never really captured the magic of what that original trilogy did. That trilogy had, interesting characters, had incredible sequences, but I also just feel like this movie tries, but doesn't really understand, even though it's done by Peter Jackson. I'll give Lord of the Rings, War of the Rohirrim 2 out of 4 stars. Stream it. So, what's your favorite Lord of the Rings movie, or who's your favorite Lord of the Rings character? Comment down below, subscribe to the channel. This is Pat. Stay safe.